Hi, my name is Amanda McKay, and I'm a speech therapist for the Rock Hill School District. So what does a speech therapist do? Basically, we help people with communication, and that comes in lots of different forms. Communication can start with just the way that you speak, helping people, not necessarily always children, but even adults, be able to speak clearly and articulate all sounds correctly. That's one thing that we do. Another area that we work on is called fluency, which is basically, you might think of it as people that stutter. So when they kind of get stuck on their words, we help to teach them tools to help them to speak more smoothly. We also work in an area called language, which is helping people to understand what they're hearing. That's called auditory comprehension, so their listening skills, and also helping people to be able to verbally express themselves. So answering questions and being able to share with other people what they know, because that's difficult for some people. Also, speech therapists can work on voice training, so teaching people to use their voice more appropriately and not abuse their voice, because sometimes speaking too loudly can damage the anatomy of our body and the area that helps us to speak. And also we work on, believe it or not, swallowing. Not really necessarily at the school level, but in other kind of more medical environments, we work with people on swallowing and making sure they're doing it safely, because sometimes after things like a stroke or a traumatic brain injury, there's areas in the brain that get damaged, and we have to work with people to teach them different strategies to help them so when they swallow that it doesn't go into their lungs. So it's a lot to be able to communicate effectively with others, because some people, that's a weakness for them.
So what are the different areas that you can work in as a speech-language pathologist?
So there's a lot. So first of all, of course, I work in a school, definitely a school setting. You can work in a hospital setting, taking care of patients of all ages, whether that is for, if something happens, like if they are in a car accident, or if they're older and they have a stroke, or if they have dementia, you can do that. You can also work in a rehab setting, so if people have went some kind of a trauma in some way, and the area of their brain was impacted that involves speech or swallowing, then your services are needed in a rehab setting. You can do private practice, which would be just on your own, doing all the things basically that I just described, but you can have your own kind of clinic and people come to you. You can do home health, which is where you go into someone's home and provide them services there. You could work in a kind of a early childhood setting, preschool, or going into daycares and working with those students. So there's definitely a lot of options with this job.
So what kind of education do you need to become a speech-language pathologist?
All right, so you definitely have to have, well, you start out, you have to have a 4-year degree, an undergrad. I actually have my undergrad degree in psychology and then also in education. So I kind of started with that, and then I went on to get my master's plus 30 in communication sciences disorders. So you definitely need to have a master's, preferably a master's plus 30.
So what is a master's plus 30? What's the difference between a master's and master's plus 30?
So a typical master's degree, and I may get this a little wrong, but it's around 60 credit hours after you've already gotten your bachelor's degree. But then a master's plus 30 is you're getting an additional 30 hours. So it's almost like a master's and a half, I guess. Mm-hmm. So it's just those extra hours to get extra coursework in, or for me it was a lot of practicum, going to actual sites and kind of practicing doing the job under a supervisor, just to get that extra education, hands-on education.
What would you recommend someone major in college to become a speech-language pathologist later on?
For like your bachelor's degree? Mm-hmm. Honestly, there you can get an undergraduate degree in communication sciences, so kind of in speech. So that's definitely a great one to go with. For me, if your plan is to work in a school, I really recommend getting your bachelor's degree maybe in education, especially special education, because you're going to work very closely with special education teachers. A lot of the things that they do overlap with what you do, like evaluating and writing individualized education plans for students. So a lot of the same kind of things. Plus we work, a lot of the kids that we see are kids that are already in special education.
So what is the difference between someone who works in the school setting and someone who works in a medical setting?
Okay, so working in the school setting, I'll kind of tell you the different things that we have to do that someone in a medical setting might not. So working in the school, you're part of the school, you're part of the staff at the school. So that sometimes is going to involve you having extra kind of job roles that you wouldn't have if you were working maybe in a hospital or private practice. So for example, here at my school, I have a duty every Monday morning that I have to report to before my normal working hours. Also school functions, like at the beginning of the year when we have open house, or if we have like parent-teacher conference nights, that will require me to stay and be at the school and do those things too. So also working in the school, one of the pros of it is you get to be on the school schedule, which is great. You have summers off, you get spring break, Christmas break, all those holidays that we get when you're students out of school, you get those off when you work, but you still get paid, like over the summer. So I'm home with my kids, but I'm still getting paid. And then working in a medical setting, definitely some pros. You're going to make a little more money working in that setting. Definitely get paid more. You don't have to worry about those extra duties. The actual amount of clients that you work with may be smaller working in a medical setting. But then some of the cons is that you're going to work year round. You're going to have longer hours. You might not get home until 6 o'clock at night, where working in the schools, I'm done by 3:30. So I've always said that one of the pros for me at this point in my life for working in a school is I have children that are younger, and I get to be a mom too, and I'm on their schedule. If I was working in a medical setting, yes, I'd be making more money, but I would have to have a lot more help with them. I'd have to be paying someone to watch them until I got home at night, or maybe on weekends or holidays, where by being in the school, I'm home with them during that time.
So in the schools, do you have to work on IEPs?
I do, and an IEP is an individualized education plan. Anytime that a student qualifies to receive speech therapy or any other special education service in the school district, they're going to have an IEP, which is basically a document, their own personal document, talking about the weaknesses that they have, and then the goals that they're going to, the goal that they're going to have to try to improve that weakness, and kind of how we're going to get there. So that's something that you have to kind of become an expert in if you're going to work in the school, is understanding what an IEP is, knowing how to write one correctly, and just knowing that you're going to have one of those for every student that you work with. And a typical case amount for a speech therapist in the school setting is around 60 students. So you're going to have 60 students with 60 IEPs and progress reports that go with those IEPs that are due every 4.5 weeks. So it's a lot of paperwork to keep up with.
What does a typical day and a typical year look like in the day of a speech-language pathologist?
Okay, so a typical day, usually I would get here at 7:30, start seeing students around 8 o'clock. And one of the things I do love about my job is I don't have to follow a curriculum. I don't have to teach this exact thing on this exact day. So I get a little bit of freedom on as far as what my day is going to look like. So I will see students in small groups, usually 3 to 4 kids at a time, and they will come in and sit with me at this table, and we will do a different activity, whether it's a game or it's a craft or maybe a book with an activity afterwards. And you kind of have freedom to make that your own. So if you're someone that loves art and being creative, then you can do a craft and implement whatever their speech goal is that they're working on. So for example, let's say that it was a student that was working on R sounds. They couldn't produce R's correctly because a lot of kids have problems with that. We could read a story, and as we're reading it, we will kind of do like a word hunt for any word that starts with an R, and then we'll write those words down. And then afterwards, we might do a craft or some kind of an activity where we take those words that had their target sound, the R sound, and we somehow put it into the craft. And that way the students have fun, they're doing something that they enjoy, but they're also working on their sounds, which is their the reason that they're coming to speech to begin with. And also then they can take that with them, and they can take it home and have kind of a practice word list to do at home with their parents. So kids will come in every 30 minutes. I'll see students throughout the day. I may have a break here and there in between groups, just depending on the day. And that usually kind of goes from 8 to about 2 o'clock, just seeing these students in small groups. Also throughout the day, I may have to attend meetings. for the kids that I work with. Usually on a given day, there's at least one meeting, sometimes multiple. So you gotta kind of be able to work that in and be flexible with your schedule. And then try to think if there's anything else. Obviously I'll get a lunch break, but that's kind of, I don't have a certain time that I have to take my lunch. I can change it on a given day. So one thing I do love about my job is there's a lot of flexibility. I kind of control my schedule to a point. So most of the speech therapists at the Rock Hill School District, we have at least 2 schools. So for example, for years I was here at India Hook, and then I also would go to Rock Hill High School twice a week in the afternoons and work with students there. So you definitely have to be prepared to maybe travel a little in between schools. You may have to go into a daycare center to work with kids. Personally, I like that too, because I don't feel like I'm always just at the same place. I kind of get to see some variety and get to go to other locations and see other age levels of kids. Also, I kind of get stir crazy, so it gives me a chance. I like to be able to take a little break and drive somewhere, just kind of get out. So yeah, it's kind of cool that you have, I guess, just a range of different ages that you'll see, and you know that you may be able to just move around and not just be at the same place all day.
What types of activities would you do with high school students as a speech-language pathologist in the schools?
So when I was at the high school, a lot of the students on my caseload there were students in a self-contained setting. So those were kids with more moderate to severe special needs. So honestly, I would do a lot of my same activities that I would do at the elementary level with those students, just because that was kind of cognitively where they were at, was their age equivalent was kind of a younger age child. I did have some students that I worked with that were in the general education setting, and those were more students that maybe had this stuttering, or they had some language weaknesses. So I would honestly, for those students, I would support them with what they were already doing. So for example, if they were in an English class and they were struggling with some of the vocabulary and just understanding it, I would be in contact with their teachers, and they would send me information that I could kind of help them to study or practice. Maybe kind of, if they were getting ready to start a new story in like English or literacy, I would kind of go with them and pre-teach to them some of the bigger words that might be difficult for them that they weren't familiar with, and we would talk about them, so that then when it came time for them to actually have that assignment, they kind of already had a little bit of background and understanding of it.
So what does the salary look like for a speech-language pathologist in the schools and in a medical setting?
So in the school setting, you're going to be, as of right now, hopefully this changes, but right now you're going to be put on the teacher pay scale. So the good thing is, though, to be a speech therapist or speech language pathologist, you do have to have that higher level of schooling, so the master's plus 30. So although you're on a teacher pay scale, you're on the higher end of it, because you're on the teacher pay scale for that degree level, which is definitely higher than like those teachers who only have a bachelor's degree. So right now I have years of experience in the schools. I'm on year 13, and I make right around $50,000 a year. If you were to be in a more medical setting or a rehab setting, you're definitely going to make more, probably $65,000 to $75,000 a year, just depending on where you're at. So definitely you'll make more money, but then you have to remember that you're going to be working longer hours and also working all year round, where in the school, you're going to be on that school schedule where you get your summers off and you're essentially finished with your workday by 3:30 or 4 o'clock.
If you could give one piece of advice to anyone who wants to become a speech-language pathologist, what would that be?
Okay, I have a couple. So number one, if you really want to be a speech therapist, speech language pathologist, do begin to get strong in your ability to work with kids. Because even if you do work with adults, a lot of times it's adults that have had some kind of trauma happen to them, or some kind of a condition where their cognitive skills have been weakened in some way. And so you're gonna, even though they may be an adult or be an older student, they're going to need some of those same kind of techniques that you're going to work with when you're working with kids. So being able to just sit down with kids and just get on their level and play with them and talk to them. So that's one. My second piece of advice is learn to be creative. Learn to, at the drop of a hat, be able to find something something in your purse, something on the table, and be able to turn it into a speech language activity. That's one thing that we always say. And then my third piece of advice is be organized. Learn how to get really organized with your paperwork and being able to manage a lot of just information, because that's definitely a part of the job. It's a part that it's probably one of my weaker areas, whereas working with the kids and being creative is stronger for me, but I've had to just kind of learn over the years to work on my organization.